We are live.
Thank you, Ms. Parvex. Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Exam Schools Admissions Task Force. Because this is a remote session, I will ask Ms. Parvex to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Contempasis. Mr. Acevedo, Ms. Aguirre, Mr. Kreger, Dr. Freeman Wisdom,
Here.
Ms. Grassa,
Present.
Ms. Lam,
Present.
Ms. Garrett,
Present.
Dr. Tang,
Present.
Ms. Waite, Ms. Sullivan,
Present.
Mr. Contempasis.
Present. Thank you. We are pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabo Verdean, Portuguese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Arabic, and American Sign Language. After I finish introducing the interpreters, we will activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. Our Spanish interpreter this evening is Randolph Dominguez. Will you please invite our Spanish-speaking audience to switch their Zoom channel in Spanish?
Good evening, Mr. Contempasis. Good evening, everybody else in this meeting. Muy buenas tardes, damas y caballeros. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Voy a ser su intérprete en el idioma español de manera simultánea. Para poder accesar la interpretación en español, van a buscar en la parte inferior de su pantalla un globo terráqueo. En este globo terráqueo, ustedes van a estar seleccionando el idioma español y van a poder escuchar la interpretación de manera simultánea. Si están utilizando un celular, en la parte superior derecha hay 3 puntos de su pantalla y ahí van a seleccionar el idioma español y van a pulsar allí. Deben de esperar que la interpretación sea activada para ver el globo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Our Cabo Verdean interpreter is Jojan Lopes. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Cabo Verdean?
Thank you, Mr. Contempasis. Good evening, everyone. Boa tarde, meu nome é Josiane, serei ser meus intérpretes simultânea, porque a reunião li, para ter acesso à interpretação simultânea, logo que estiver disponível, nós clicamos no ícone de globo, na parte inferior de nosso ecrã e seleciona Cabo Verdeano. Nós podemos fazer mesmo no nosso telemóvel, clicando no 3 pontinhos na parte superior direita. Se nós temos alguma dúvida, nos coloca no chat. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Portuguese interpreter is Christian Leitner. Please give Zoom instructions in Portuguese.
Hello, thank you, sir. Oi, boa noite. Eu sou Cristiane, intérprete de português brasileiro. Se você precisa de interpretação simultânea para essa reunião, quando eles ativarem os canais, você vai ver um globo na parte inferior da tela. Você clica ali e escolhe o canal português. Se você estiver escutando, ouvindo essa reunião de um celular, você vai ver na parte superior direita 3 pontinhos, você clica ali e escolhe o canal português. Obrigada.
Thank you. Our Vietnamese interpreter is V. Lee. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Vietnamese?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vi. I will be your Vietnamese interpreter for tonight. Kính chào quý vị, tôi tên là Vi, tôi sẽ là thông dịch viên của quý vị ngày hôm nay. Xin quý vị nhìn vào màn hình và có quả cầu ở dưới thì bấm vào cầu và tìm tiếng Việt để có được thông dịch viên thông dịch lại hết cho quý vị hiểu. Cảm ơn rất nhiều. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Cantonese interpreter is Anna Tse. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Cantonese?
Thank you, Mr. Contempasis, and good evening, everyone. 大家好，我係嚟今晚嘅廣東話同步翻譯。一陣間見到個地球儀嘅時候，撳落去揀 Chinese 就會成功進入到廣東話嘅翻譯頻道噶啦。咁咧，如果你係需要用手機嘅話咧，咁你就撳嗰3個點就揀更多，亦都會成功進入咗廣東話嘅翻譯頻道。多謝大家，一陣間見。Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our Mandarin interpreter is Wei Li. Will you please give the Zoom instructions in Mandarin?
Thank you, sir. 大家晚上好我是您的普通话翻译我会为你今天做这个同声传译。如果你需要普通话的翻译的话呢，如果你是用电脑的话呢， 就是选中这个地球仪的标志，然后呢选这个中文Mandarin 频道，就可以进到听我的翻译。如果你用手机或者是平板电脑的话呢，它有3个点你就点这个3个点之后呢，也会出现这个中文这个频道，然后你就可以进去可以听我的翻译。好 ，OK，back to you, sir.
Thank you. Our Haitian Creole interpreter is Sergio Saint-Hilaire. Please give the Zoom instructions in Haitian Creole.
Hi everyone, good evening. Nous comptons encore pour nous avoir aujourd'hui pour nous présenter sa séance pour nous traduire pour nous tout ça que on a fait, tout ça tu as besoin de pas hésiter pour dire. Si vous besoin d'entrer dans la conversation, ou cliquer sur le globe là ou ouais dans bas écran là et ou cap entrer, ou choisir langue créole. Et c'est nous-mêmes qui traduit pour moi-même les Sergio et que pas hésiter tout ça veut dire m'a dit pour vous. Merci beaucoup. Bonne écoute.
Thank you. Our Arabic interpreter is Ahmed Al-Rubaye. Please give the Zoom instructions in Arabic.
Hello everyone, my name is Ahmed Al-Rubaye. I will be your Arabic interpreter today. مرحبا، أنا اسمي أحمد الربيعي، أنا مترجم اللغة العربية لهذا اليوم. بإمكانكم الاستماع إلى الترجمة باللغة العربية عن طريق الذهاب إلى أسفل الشاشة. ستشاهدون علامة الكرة الأرضية. اضغط على هذه العلامة وستظهر لك اختيارات اللغات. قم باختيار اللغة العربية وعندها ستتمكن من الاستماع إلى الترجمة كاملة. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We also have American Sign Language interpreters this evening, Charlotte D. Spingston, Sharon Mendez, and Andrew Pidcometti. Thank you all for assisting us this evening. We will now activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Item 3 on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the June 11th, 2021 meeting. The minutes have been distributed. I believe all of us have received them. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. May I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Ms. Lum. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Parvex, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Aguirre,
Yes.
Mr. Kreger, Dr. Freeman Wisdom,
Present.
Ms. Grassa,
Yes.
Ms. Lam,
Yes.
Ms. Garrett. Sorry.
Yes.
Dr. Tang,
Yes.
Ms. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mr. Contampasses.
Yes,
It's unanimous. Thank you.
the minutes are approved. Item number 4 on the agenda is a review of data requested. I believe Ms. Hogan has joined us. Ms. Hogan, are you ready to present us with your updates, please?
Good evening. Just pull up the right file. This one is just a spreadsheet. You'll see as I sort of explain it, hard to put into a slide, but you will get a copy of this. So just to orient you to the file, the first 2 tabs are tables you have seen before. So these are the simulations that we ran. Actually, I'm going to pull up a reminder slide. You've also seen this slide before. So I just want to remind you how the simulations were run. We assumed 1,000 invitations. We used the 7th grade applicants who were applying for school year 2021. So those are the current 7th graders. We used the GPA using the fall terms only to align with the conversation around using fall grades. And then we used 50% GPA and 50% IC score. That's because that is the only assessment we have for the whole population, even though the use of an assessment going forward would not be the IC. Reminders that this simulation does not incorporate student preference for school. And then this slide also includes the bullet points of the outstanding decisions on which grades and terms for GPA and the use of an assessment. So let me go back into the spreadsheet. So the question was around how do the tiers impact neighborhood diversity? So we had previously provided these tables by race and economic status. It shows you both simulations if we were to do 20% citywide, 80% straight rank by tier, as well as 100% straight rank by tier. And the second tab includes the tables by zip code. And so what has been added, 2 additional tabs that look at the difference between the simulation results and different historical data. And so I'm not going to read you every single number, but the first tab looks at the 20%, 80% simulations. I've highlighted in pink zip codes that were underrepresented in the 2021 admissions cycle when compared to the percentage of 6th grade students enrolled in BPS that year. And I've highlighted in blue zip codes that were overrepresented in that same admission cycle. I've also hidden quite a few columns, but they are all here if when you get this file, you would like to unhide them. I've focused on the 3-tier options, 1, 5, and 6. Those are the options that all include the English language variable we've talked about. And so what you'll see in columns AK to AP is comparing the difference between the simulation with the invitations from the school year 21-22 admission cycle. That is the admission cycle of the interim plan where we use zip codes. So for example, 02119, which is the first pink row, had 5.1% of invitations under the interim policy, which is what you see in this column. Under option 1 of the simulation, they had 4.3% of invitations. And the difference there is a slight decrease of 0.8%. The next columns compare between the BPS 6th grade enrollment from 1920, as well as the previous year's invitation cycle. There is an additional tab that does the comparison for the simulation with the 100% tier distribution. Ms. Sullivan or Mr. Contempasis, I'm not sure how much more in depth is helpful to go.
It would be helpful if we could just pause for a moment so people can, so task force members can actually read the information, because I don't know that all task force members have seen this. So could you scroll down a little bit so we can see pink and blue? That'd be super helpful.
I can't fit them all on one.
Nope, is that all of the pink and blue, or are there others?
That is all of the pink and blue, yes.
Yep, so, and those are so pink is.
They were underrepresented in
And
the
blue is over.
2021 admission cycle, and blue is overrepresented.
Okay, all right. Let's see here. And a question. Just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So the question was, how do the question was, does the use of socioeconomic tiers,
Impact.
how does the
neighborhood
use of socioeconomic tiers impact geographic diversity? And so to answer that question, we should be looking at which columns?
So if we're using the interim policy as a comparison point,
Yep, yes,
then that's these 3 columns to focus on.
great, okay. I'm sorry. Would it be those 3 columns plus column I?
Yes.
Okay,
Column I is the actual from the interim policy. And then these AE through AJ are the results of the simulation. And then these 3 columns, AK through AP, tell you the difference. So it did the math for you.
excellent, thank you. So we have hands raised. I see Miss Lum and then Miss Scarrett.
Thank you. And thank you, Monica, for doing, Ms. Hogan, for doing this immense work of analysis. I'm just wondering if you have, because right now we're on the zip comparisons 100%. Are there any general observations you noted when you ran the two different, the 2080 and the 100% models, if there was a significant or statistically significant impact in any neighborhood or zip code between one model versus the other?
I can't speak to statistical significance because we haven't run any of those tests. Excuse me. I think similar to patterns we've seen with other data, you see the majority of zip codes don't have large changes. There's a lot of within 0.5% increase or decrease, but we do see some of the zip codes having larger increases. And if it's helpful, I can put those two on the same tab next to each other. It becomes a lot of numbers, trying to figure out which ones are the right ones to compare. But I am happy to do that comparison if that would be helpful to see the difference between the 2080. So like, for example, the difference between this 1.9 for Longwood Fenway versus the 0.7 change in the 2080. So I'm happy to make that table if that would be helpful.
So maybe I can ask the question, and maybe this is more directed to my colleagues on the task force, which is, are there any indications that we should be looking for to be concerned about, I guess? Or should we be concerned if there's a swing that's over 1%, for example, between the two models? Or should we be concerned about specific neighborhoods and making sure that those neighborhoods are either remaining status quo or improving or not, or at least not diminishing? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are there any broad stroke trends that we should be concerned about or thinking about as we analyze this data?
Part of our charge includes geographic diversity. And so you ask a great question with respect to geographic diversity around, kind of impact on neighborhoods. I do think we probably need to sit with this a little bit because I don't know. So a few things come to mind for me on this. One is bearing in mind that the data set we're using for the comparison is the 1920 invitations. And we know that the geographic diversity in that year was not, there wasn't a lot of geographic diversity in that year. And so one of the things I think we have to keep in mind is, again, kind of we can't change the population of students, of invited students. And so it is going to yield, again, the data is very clear. It yields what it yields. It yields not a lot of geographic diversity. And so in looking at it in comparison to the interim policy, part of our analysis, I think, has to include that we're beginning from a point in 1920 when we didn't have a lot of diversity. So I say all that to say, like, I don't want to, I don't want to be too concerned about a shift in geographic diversity, but I also think it's important for us to, make sure that we take the time to analyze the data that has been provided. So Ms. Lum, appreciate your question, but unless someone else has an answer tonight on this, we might have to take a moment to look at the data to be able to answer that question specifically. Ms. Garrett, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Ms. Sullivan. Maybe following up from Ms. Lum, actually, in an attempt to try to get to the answer to that question around the impact on neighborhood diversity in this model. If you wouldn't mind, Ms. Hogan, flipping back to the 100%, just because that was the one I had looked at when I was going to ask my question. I think of Dr. Tung asking, what is the big headline on pieces of data we get? And I'm trying to get that takeaway. And I just want to make sure that I'm reading it correctly. We do have the 1920 invitees, as Ms. Sullivan said, and that's in yellow, correct? The yellow column. Oh, no, that's the difference. That's the difference between the two.
Yep. So this column F, 2021 invitees are the students, the last students who took the IC who enrolled this past fall.
Yes, and those are our current 7th graders.
Yes.
And as Ms. Sullivan mentioned, this was a class that we're going from a baseline that we know has disproportional neighborhood representation. And then in the yellow column is the difference between that cohort and the current cohort. Is that right?
This is the difference between the BPS 6th grade population that year.
I understand. Okay.
So this column.
Understood. And now the purple column is our class that we're preparing to welcome. Is that correct?
Yes, invited under the interim policy.
And so to Ms. Lum's question, when we're trying to assess neighborhood diversity to some level, we're looking for significant variances between this current policy where zip code was used and the simulation columns. Is that right?
Yes.
So while this doesn't answer Ms. Lum's question, I just want to make sure I understand the pink column that says difference option 1, AK. Am I understanding correctly that looking specifically at the pink and blue columns, the most significant impact would actually be an increase in one of the previously underrepresented neighborhoods, which is East Boston? Is that a correct reading of that column?
Yes.
Okay. And it also would appear from this column that even though there is potentially there are slight decreases between less than 1% and 2% decreases in neighborhoods that are pink and blue, it does not appear that the pink neighborhood decreases connected to any increase in the blue neighborhoods. Does that make sense? That we're not looking at a graph where there are a bunch of minuses on the pinks and pluses on the blue, which is a pattern that I imagine would have been troubling. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yes, I would agree with that logic.
So it might suggest that the increase that is coming from neighborhoods that were fairly neutral in this process, that potentially the additional slight percentages are going to neighborhoods that were fairly aligned in the first place. Because if we're looking at all minuses for both the pink and the blue, the students have to be going somewhere, I imagine. So I'm presuming that they're going to neighborhoods that did not play significantly in an imbalance.
Can you scroll up, Ms. Hogan, please?
That is as far up as it goes.
Great.
So to Ms. Lum's question, just to know if I'm thinking about it correctly, though I agree with Ms. Sullivan, it's a lot to take in the moment. My initial impression of this is that there is not a significant impact on geographic diversity by using tiers instead of zip codes.
Well, I would say this is 100%. Remember the 20/80 split, right? The 20/80 split is where we saw in the 20% a significant shift in terms of where representation lies. So on the 100%, that could be the case, which is good data to have if that is indeed the case.
Yeah, which is why I just wanted to, my question was just if I was approaching the reading of it correctly, so that when we have more time, we could apply it to the other tab or any of them. But I just wanted to make sure that my understanding of what I was seeing was correct using the example of the 100%.
And I also just want to add, I know we had some conversation around the simulations from the fall being pretty close to what actually happened. There are some more unknowns in this process because when we ran simulations in the fall, we had actual grades for students because those grading terms had completed already. Because we're talking about grades that have not been earned yet, there is more uncertainty. So I just want to make sure that I put that out there as a qualification around this data as we think about the simulations.
That variation would be due to a grade factor and not due to the change in the geographic approach.
It's hard to say for certain because we're also incorporating a test into these simulations with the previous IC scores. So there is a number of differences that it is hard to pinpoint what may be driving certain changes. That makes sense.
But the act of changing from zip code to geography alone, with all things being the same, though we know they won't be, would not be the unknown piece. The unknown pieces are all of the other eligibility criteria that may then impact the neighborhood diversity.
I think so, yes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Because I'm not sure that can you please repeat that?
Because when Ms. Hogan was naming the unknowns as yet,
Yeah.
The neighborhood diversity could be affected by the variables that we haven't hashed out yet, but the just pure isolated act of shifting to the tiers instead of the zip codes with all conditions being the same is not the thing that most dramatically affects the diversity.
Do we have the census tract data?
So this data is based on the census tract tiers.
Right, do we have the census tract data without the tiers?
We have not done any simulations that would not use tiers with census tracts.
I think I saw Dr. Tung's hand raised.
The thing about census tracts is there are like 80 plus of them.
160.
160? So we would have to group them.
Right, which is what we've been discussing for the last 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, and after last night and the plea for something simple for the public to understand, grouping by census tracts is not obvious how to do, I guess. But the reason my hand was raised, I don't know if we should shift. The reason my hand was raised is because in the triplets, starting with AQ and then AW, I just wanted to, as people look at this data, I was with Miss Garrett, we're looking both at the sign, positive or negative in the pink and blue, but also the size of the differences. And the AQ triplet and the AW triplet tell us different things, comparing the simulations to the 6th grade size and to the pre-pandemic policy as well. So I just wanted to point that out as people dig into this table.
Great. Are there any other slides, any other data that you have to share with us tonight, Ms. Hogan?
No.
Great. Any other questions on this data? Great. Are we ready to move to the next conversation? Mr.
Well,
Contenpasses, we ready? Yeah. Dr. Tung.
I guess once we figure out whether tiers give us what we need in a way that's better than zip codes or not better than zip codes, I have been interested in the idea of grouping census tracts without tiering them. But I just, you know, I don't know what our timeline is.
Well, that data has been requested for several weeks now, but we're not getting it tonight. So
Can I respond to the grouping question?
Sure.
I don't have a way to group them that is not arbitrary. So if you have suggestions on ways in which you would like to create groupings, we're happy to do that, but without a data-informed approach to grouping census tract tiers, it'd sort of be looking at a map and trying to draw circles. So I'm open to suggestions and ideas, but that's not something that we can do without sort of a data-informed approach to those groupings.
Of course. Well, it's similar to redistricting or precincting. There are processes that are used to group geographic locations that are used in other practices, other disciplines that surely we might be able to use to help guide us through this process. But I am mindful of the time, and we have a conversation about assessments that we need to get to. We're not going to resolve this particular issue tonight with respect to the census tracts or the tiers. So I would like to move to the conversation on assessment unless there's an objection to doing so. We good? Great. So with that, we have on the table a few questions to resolve. We have talked about assessment several times prior to this meeting. We've talked about the use of MCAS. We've talked about the use of the NWEA MAP growth assessment. And in the context of the NWEA MAP growth assessment, we've talked about the utilization of a growth measure. And we've also talked about the utilization of an absolute score. In addition, there has been discussion about not using an assessment at all. I'd like to start the conversation. I'd like to start the conversation in for school year 20. What are we in? We're in 21. So for school, so I'd like to start the conversation for applications that would be submitted in school year 22. This is based on Mr. Acevedo's recommendation on, I believe it was Monday evening, that we try to resolve what, if we acknowledge that as a city, as a district, we are still impacted, that COVID is still impacting what will happen for this upcoming school year, that perhaps we begin with school year 20 applications in school year 22, and then work our way backward with perhaps thinking about this as a phased-in approach, similar to how we're approaching the grades. How do folks feel about that?
So we're talking about the entering class in 23, 24.
Yes.
Okay.
And I will open the floor for conversation on what we should do, what the recommendation should be relative to an assessment for that year. First, looking at answering the, responding to the question of assessment, no assessment, then responding to if an assessment, then as between MCAS and MAP growth, either or and then we can move into a conversation about weights. But I'm gonna open the floor for school year 23. Ms. Lum, you're on mute.
I'd like to get a sense of, in a normal year, for 5th grade and for 6th grade, what tests are administered when, all things being equal.
5th grade and 6th grade. I don't know. Is Ms. Grassa available to, I know not on camera, but are you able to?
Yes, I can. So the test that right now we'll be giving the MAP test in the fall, the winter, and the spring for ELA, and I believe math is a potential option, but I think it's mandated in ELA. MCAS will be given each spring. Our assumption is MCAS will continue as it had previous to the pandemic. There are also interim assessments that the district designs that are given throughout the year at different times. And there are hosts of other assessments that could possibly be given.
And what about, is that 5th and 6th grade?
Yes, that would be the same for both 5th and 6th grade. There are some other assessments. There might be an assessment at the end of a unit, a school designed assessment, but not necessarily across the board mandated.
Okay. But both MCAS and MAP would be given on the schedule that you articulated in both 5th and 6th grade. We lost.
Sorry. I'm
Oh,
back.
oh, there she is.
Sorry, tech switch. So yes, I heard you in 5th and 6th grade. Yes, MCAS is given in the spring of both 5th and 6th grade. In 5th grade, they take ELA, math and science. In 6th grade, they take ELA in math. And I know that the district has the option for the MAP to be given in both ELA and math 3 times throughout the year. I would say most schools are doing it at a minimum at fall and spring, and potentially progress monitoring in the winter for students who are maybe not meeting the benchmark in the fall. But that it's not otherwise mandated that every school, unless the things are changing for next year.
Thank you. Ms. Lum, did you have a follow-on question or did you have a thought?
No, I just wanted to make sure I heard correctly. You said the MAP growth was given, or the MAP test is that going to be standard for all 5th and 6th graders? Specifically, you said ELA and maybe math too, or?
Yeah, I think Ms. Hogan would probably know best if we know if there's being a change in assessment. I'm assuming there is not. The other caveat is that in Boston, we do have pilot schools. And so some of our pilot schools have the autonomy to choose other assessments to give, but it is my understanding that right now MAP is the assessment that we're giving standardly across BPS as of this year.
Thank you. Ms. Garrett.
Thanks. Just adding on to a few timeline considerations for context, as I think I've expressed position on assessments enough for the moment. But for a timeline to consider as well is the standard time that families are usually learning about exam school invites, I think is important to know, which is usually the month of March. We did, through the interim process, experience the challenges of delay with that. So I think that's just something for us also to consider in the assessment timeline in terms of what would be possible to get back to a notification process that's more aligned and that also aligns with the district's other placements. The late notification this year delayed other BPS families unrelated to the exam schools from hearing about their school placements as well. Because the schools are so large, it has a ripple effect. So I just want to keep that date in mind. To that end, also just want us to understand that, as I'm sure everyone does, that if we are talking about MCAS, we do need a comfort level with it being not in their current active school year. So for example, for a prospective 7th grader, if we are thinking about MCAS as a test option for students who have that test available to them, we just should be reminded it is their 5th grade score, and that not everyone would have one, but those are just the 2 pieces of consideration. And then the last context setting that may be helpful, as I know we've talked about growth in different conversations, is just if we are thinking about assessments as indicators of grade level readiness, and I'd just love us to give some time today to explaining how growth does that. I think Ms. Grassa was the person who gave an example in a previous meeting of a 1st to 3rd grade growth, for example. And I know we heard from public comment at school committee last night about some concerns of even the approach to taking the test might be affected if a student knows that they need to improve by a certain amount more in the case of growth. So I'd just love to give that some time today, as I do have some concerns about that in light of those 2 factors.
So let's start at the end. Ms. Hogan, do you want to speak to the response we received from NWEA regarding the monitoring or services that they have available to monitor for, let's call it unusual activity on with respect to the assessment when used for growth, 1, and then 2, with respect to grade level, I have not heard anyone on our task force indicate that they are not in support of students being at grade level. What I do recall from the NWEA presentation, Chris Minnick's presentation, is that they are able to provide us with, or would be able to provide us with some scoring that would be able to indicate whether a student is at grade level or not. And so that would be something that from an operational standpoint, the district would need to work with NWEA on. But I do know that Ms. Hogan specifically asked about this question around, whether NWEA has a mechanism for identifying unusual, let's call it that, unusual test variation. Ms. Hogan.
And so we spoke with NWEA about one of their growth reports that they provide that compares testing conditions between 2 different testing times to try and understand if, maybe it was a short duration of test in one time, and then the second time they took much longer, indicating the student might have rushed the first time and been more deliberate the second time. Things like that, looking at speed at which the student takes the test. And then you can use that information alongside the growth data that is produced from those 2 test sessions. A decision would still need to be made around if something does look abnormal, what do we do with that information? Is it, looking at results by the test location to see if maybe something happened in administration that day, or trying to understand what might be causing that information, and then how that affects the application process. So I think, Ms. Sullivan, did that answer your question?
I was speaking specifically to, I think they called it, what is it? I don't know, it might be as simple as calling it the premium package, I think might be the words that they used.
Premium growth report.
Thank you. I was like, in terms of being able to monitor for what might be unusual activity. The reality is that if a student is not being truthful on an assessment, a student is not going to be truthful on an assessment. And so then the question becomes, are we designing the policy around what hopefully would be an outlier, right? In the sense that most students are going to be honest in their work. So if the concern is about, the exception, okay.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up. That's my concern isn't the intentionality of, I know that was mentioned as public comment. My concern was if it's a sole growth measure, I want us to discuss how that aligns to an indication of grade readiness, because I'm unclear that piece. So if the only thing that's being assessed is growth, it would disadvantage students who don't necessarily have as much room, but more significantly than that, significant growth could still arrive significantly below grade level. So I just was hoping that could be a part of the conversation today.
Yeah, so my response to that question, Ms. Garrett, is that Mr. Minnick did indicate that they would be able to work with the district to determine, because map growth is aligned with the MCAS, they would be able to work with the district to identify kind of what that cutoff, what the threshold would be for determining that a student is at grade level. I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
So I'm almost scared to ask. Do we have, does that mean that we are all, I mean, I know there are varied opinions on assessment, but do we have agreement around growth, growth as a sole measure, not necessarily indicating grade level readiness? I don't want to overstep, but I'm just wondering.
I'm sorry, how do you draw that conclusion from what I just shared?
Because what you shared was that the test company has the ability to identify the threshold for grade level readiness. But that's a completely different indicator from growth. So I didn't know, so is that suggesting that we're looking at the threshold in combination with growth? Or is there still a consideration because just using growth, I assume to mean did not have a threshold. So maybe so that's what I was just trying to understand. Are we talking about growth with a minimum threshold, or is solely the indication of growth something that's on the table?
Great.
So maybe that got us a little clearer. Sorry, I was unclear.
Mr. Condon Passes.
I would just like to suggest that I'm not comfortable with using growth as a factor. The other thing that we have not discussed is that I think we've talked about it, but non-BPS students do not have access other than, would have to have access twice a year minimum in order to be in the process. I also talked to Mr. Midnick and asked him if he could determine an absolute score that would be equivalent to a meets or exceeds on the MCAS, as well as could he give us a threshold that would also be similar to the criteria that we used in the interim of B or better to be qualified for the pool itself. And he said he can do that. So the other piece that I think in talking to some of the people in the assessment unit, or have been in the assessment unit, we've also discussed that there may be, again, an opportunity for using growth in some way, but I would not use it to determine the readiness, if you will, of the applicant pool. I think you need either an absolute score determination or possibly a threshold that would determine, given one time during the course of the year, during the week, or on Saturdays, depending on what the options are. When you get into the growth factor, as I've heard last night, and as you mentioned, we've got to keep this simple. Same controversy around grouping census tracts is also, I think, an issue here. It requires the students to be available twice a year. I just don't think that's in the best interest of all of the students who reside in the city of Boston who wish to attend an exam school.
Ms. Lum.
I'm wondering if the 5th grade MCAS in some way can be part of the equation. So as an example, we could use for fifth grade criteria, so not the full criteria for the applicant pool, but in looking at the fifth grade criteria contributing to qualification, could we use MCAS proficient or better, or their math and ELA scores at B or better as the fifth grade criteria? And in that way, because BPS is the only one, public schools are the only ones giving MCAS, in some ways that does give a weight, a preference to BPS students because they have two opportunities to qualify as opposed to non-BPS students. And I'm only looking at fifth grade criteria.
Ms. Lum, wouldn't you consider that somewhat problematic in terms of one group of students attending BPS has two ways of getting in, the others only have one?
We've talked about other weights, so I don't see that as being any different in terms of.
No, I
there
mean
have been
in
suggestions for.
I mean
for
in
giving
terms of
points.
eligibility. If you use the MCAS in any way, shape, or form, you run into the same problem that you run into if you build a growth model around minimum giving a test twice a year. And that is that the students who are residents of the city, whose parents may have chosen an alternative to the BPS, would be disadvantaged. In my mind. Now, you guys will have to tell me that that's not the case. And I think you're talking about 23, 24. So I was going to say this year, the fifth grade MCAS.
Yeah, no, we're talking 23, 24. So I would think that the non-BPS students would have MAP or other standardized test plus GPA. So there would be a third leg of the stool for BPS students with MCAS. You know, whether that's, some might argue that there's an advantage to students who don't go to BPS, and that this third opportunity to improve on test scores, if test scores are a criteria, could be a way to level the playing field. It's not apples to apples per se, but it is one set of advantages versus another set of advantages.
Dr. Tong?
So Ms. Lum, are you saying that any resident of Boston could present either MCAS proficiency or a 3.0 GPA or MAP equivalent to MCAS proficiency in fifth grade? What about?
Yes.
Is there any sixth grade requirement, or we're just looking?
Oh, yes, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. I think the fifth grade, I like that fifth grade, those options, because they all show kids doing work at grade level.
Mr. Kreger.
I would think, I guess to Ms. Lum's point, that I think this depends on how the test is used, right? And I suppose the easiest way to correlate MAP and MCAS is what the NWEA has already told us it can do, right? Which is identify whether you are exceeding standard, meeting standard, what have you, right? In looking back over the NWEA's proposal to the district, which of course was solely a proposal, right? There are specifications about suggesting that the test be administered on the same day. If it's a Saturday, it's a Saturday for all students, or whatever the case may be. Like, I think if we are to use a test, if it's solely to determine entry into a qualified applicant pool, then I am quite comfortable with saying to students, if you've already taken the MCAS that can show us the equivalent of this, we can accept that score, right? We can accept that you have achieved that level of standard, right? I think if we are using a test for such that it's your complete performance on the test, your score that determines part of how you get into exam schools, I think it's much harder to toggle back and forth between different tests. Right? So to me, I see room and flexibility to allow students who've taken that MCAS to use that score, even if it's from a year before, to enter the qualified applicant pool in that manner. But if it's for a different purpose, I think it gets much harder to do so.
So on that question, Matt, how, for those who are how do I want to ask this question? Mr. Contenpasis.
Now, I know this is a difficult issue, but if we used the MAP test as a threshold determinant, everybody takes the test. If we use that only as a threshold determinant, then we could possibly utilize the GPA as the mechanism by which students would be chosen. But in thinking about that, rather than give a student an MCAS offer versus someone that might not have that option, if we indicated that one of the prerequisites is everybody has to take the MAP test, that it would be used for purposes of determining grade level readiness in the manner that we've discussed. And only the GPA would be used in determining how the students are selected. And if that GPA across the district in all schools could be used as an alternative to entering the pool, would that not make it much simpler?
Could you explain, Mike, Mr. Contenpasis,
we've been together too long to be formal.
I completely agree. This crew
No, the formality helps.
The formality helps, yes.
Okay, all right, I'll compromise. Mr. C, could just help me understand your last point. And I heard this in Ms. Lum's remarks as well, the use of GPA as alternative. What were you speaking to there?
I'm looking for, first of all, that every student has to take the MAP test. or whatever equivalent they come up with 3 or 5 years down the road. That a score is determined from the MAP test that is a threshold score equivalent to a B or better, since we've been told that they can equate their results to meets and exceeds on the MCAS, which would, in other words, determine the readiness of the pool. That's number one. The students that have qualified for the pool based on the MAP assessment would be ranked in the tiers on the basis of their GPA. I also suggested, and it may not be well, I'll put it on the table anyways, that if a student might have had a lousy day taking the test, but has a 3-point GPA or above, that might be considered for all students in the city, another opportunity to get into the pool.
And so I appreciate the clarification on that. And so one of the things that I recall, I don't even remember which expert came in to speak with us, but one of them spoke to using assessment as a way to verify or validate that a student's validate the GPA. I actually, and I do see hands up, so I'm going to go to the hands, but Mr. Contampasas, I think I could get there on what you just described. I think I could, because I understand what I think I've heard very loudly from our school leaders is this concern about is this concern about, the readiness and being at grade level and this readiness piece. And of course, I won't rehash or very clear on kind of the challenges that I have with using assessments in this, in this high stakes way. But I actually think what you've just described could work, I think, in terms of trying to balance the various concerns and expectations. So I appreciate that. I think that could work. But let me go to hands. One moment. I just want to, for some reason, I'm not in the right order. Miss Lum.
Miss Aguirre, it was Miss Aguirre.
Oh, Miss Aguirre. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the clarification at the end that, because that was my main concern. If a student has a bad day, using a one shot for getting someone in or out of the pool, I mean, that worries me. If we are willing to also include in the pool students who have a bad day, but who have like a 3.0 GPA, that kind of, that makes me feel better about the option. But I worry a little bit about using the GPA for giving priority somehow to some students, because we have discussed like many times how some schools have like on average higher grades than others. So I wonder if we are kind of, I don't know, help students from some schools get a priority if we use the GPA for prioritizing the choice or getting into the pool.
Ms. Garrett.
Thank you. I do now understand Mr. Kanampasis's suggestion. I don't understand how that's not the interim policy that we have now. If you have an option for students not to take an assessment and get in via a B, that's certainly a proposal, but it means that there is no assessment. There wouldn't be any student getting an exam school invitation with grades lower than a B anyway, if grades are the ranking factor. As we saw from the data, there are enough students in the district who get A's and B's that it would never get to the students who have lower than a B. So if Mr. Kanampasis is saying, take a test if you want to, but because I understand the bad day piece, I'm also very drawn to the point that that one day is so consequential. And I know that's one of Dr. Tung's major concerns about high stakes tests. I would then draw back to Mr. Kreger's suggestion that there are multiple assessments that could be used, especially if it were a threshold. If the point of using GPA instead of an assessment to get into the pool is in case, I don't know what we would do to measure a bad day. I like the idea of students having multiple opportunities to meet the testing threshold, but if there are two mechanisms to get into the pool, one just involving GPA, then there is an essentially just GPA as the deciding factor. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that. And if so, we should discuss. But if the test is a potential indication of some grade level readiness, then I go back to the concerns around the subjectivity of grades, because basically in the placement of students, we would be solely using grades as the determining factor, which is what we did with the interim policy, which is some of the things we've wrestled with in terms of that being something that's permanent.
So Ms. Garrett, I'll let Mr. Kanampasis respond, but I have written down with kind of lines next to it, the number of times that Mr. Kanampasis said all students need to take the MAP growth. So or need to take the assessment. So I maybe I missed something. Were you suggesting, Mr. Kanampasis, do you want to respond?
No, I'm indicating that any applicant to the exam schools would have to sit for the assessment, would have to sit for the MAP test.
Okay. Yeah.
I can come back. I'd rather hear from everybody else as to where they are.
Okay.
Because, you know, I understand what Ms. Garrett is saying.
And
absent using, let's go to others who have raised their hand, and then I'll come back.
All right, Ms. Lum.
So if we if we look at fifth grade as the set of criteria, whatever criteria that may be, as what qualifies an applicant, is there a possibility then to look at sixth grade fall MAP and first trimester or first two semester GPAs in the four subjects as the ranking mechanism? And you could do it, maybe it's just 25% MAP and 75% GPA, or some other, maybe there's even a third criteria if we do decide, we haven't gotten there yet, but I liked Ms. Nagasawa's suggestions about the question response that she had given us. So if there's a qualitative criteria as well, perhaps those three things are what determine the selection, not the applicant pool, but the selection or invitation mechanism.
Okay. Ms. Grassa.
I would like Mr. Condapasos to explain his plan again, because I heard a little bit about what you said, Ms. Sullivan, but then when Ms. Garrett said her part, I'm like, I also heard him say that. So I think I'm just a little confused about what the proposal was thrown out there. And I don't know, maybe if someone else could summarize it. I just want to make sure I'm clear, because it's hard for me to comment if I'm not sure what it is.
What I'm trying to do, and I'll get to what Ms. Grassa has asked, is that we have a couple of possibilities here. The one that I've just discussed is that regardless of the possibility, every student needs to sit for the MAP test. That's to me is a non-negotiable. There are two ways that you can deal with that. Either use an absolute score to determine the readiness of the applicant, or to use it to determine a threshold value that would allow the student to enter the applicant pool. I also suggested that because I've been hearing let's have multiple ways of getting in, that if a student had a bad day, perhaps if that student had a GPA that was grade level, and perhaps as Ms. Lum has suggested, we could have a way of giving that student access to the pool. Because if you don't weight the results of the test, in other words, if you used it to get an absolute score and you have a GPA, I'm not certain that we have determined yet whether there would be a weight assigned to the test results, the score, and a weight assigned to the GPA. We haven't discussed that. And I'm really trying to find a way that every kid sits for the exam. We get a grade level threshold. And then listening to what some of you have said, we're going to have the GPA in this mix one way or the other. We've already determined how that GPA is going to be developed. And so how do we get around the fact that if the concern of the group is the bad day situation, how do we get around that? I think, and I'm trying to get some common ground here. And I'm not I think Ms. Garrett raises some good points, but I have an option, by the way, for 22, 23, but we're not there yet.
We're not going there yet.
Yeah, I know. But if indeed there needs to be an assessment, which is my bottom line, and that every student sits for that assessment, then you either can determine an absolute score or a threshold value. I think we all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question then comes to, if you had an absolute score, how much do you weight the test score versus the GPA in terms of selecting the pool. If you use it as a threshold, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to being used in a percent score as the ISEE and the GPA would use. So it may not be acceptable is the way I've said it. You know, one of the things we could do is, you know, we've talked about, and I don't want to go this route, but, you know, we're asking people to write, you know, a statement, maybe in order to assure that the student who had a bad day, who has a 3.0 or higher, writes something that is therefore added to the mix, which would allow that student to get in the pool. I don't know. I don't know how you get around this, because I'm not comfortable that everybody is comfortable with the bad day on the test. That was the purpose behind breaking the two scores down so that they were of equal weight. And by the way, I didn't design that. That was designed for us.
Thank you.
I don't know, Ms. Grasser, I probably confused you even more.
She's up. She's up. Floor is Ms. Grasses.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm confused about why we would have everyone sit for the test if the grade would trump it. Why would we even do a test?
Well,
That's my confusion. But I feel I'm understanding. I'm also I think the purpose of this group is we should be poking holes at everything to try to really get to what is the best option. So I do think Ms. Nagasawa did offer a solution that would get at if a child is having a bad day, which will not work this year, but in the future, you could use MCAS. And if you do not like your MCAS scores from 5th grade, you could sit for the MAP assessment and use the MAP at the start of 6th grade as an alternative option. If we wanted to do that, obviously we won't have MCAS scores to do that this year. We could do the MAP assessment and maybe have 2 sittings. You get your MAP results immediately. So like, we don't have to wait. Like the ISEE, we had to wait. So we could do, you know, a September and a December. So if kids don't feel like this time they got the score that really shows who they are, we could get the results, and that's pending, you know, we would have all that, because we won't have all the grades until December anyway to do any of the calculations about who's entered. So we could do 2 different sittings for kids who feel like they didn't get, the first cut score was not their best. They had a bad day. I get it. We could offer it again. Just a thought.
Thank you. Ms. Lum, Dr. Freeman Wisdom, and then Mr. Kreger.
So I guess I'm confused again, because I thought the MAP test was mandatory for all students. Like that was an assessment test that was being given regardless. Okay.
But it hasn't been assigned as a high stakes test yet.
No, I
which
understand.
is very different.
No, I understand. So I think if I'm hearing Mr. Contenpassis correctly, he's suggesting that, and this is going to be my modified take on things, as a qualifier for the applicant pool, in my mind, it would make sense to, if you wanted to allow for the broadest possible net to be cast, you could have a 5th grade MAP threshold or a GPA that meets grade level, that reflects, in theory, reflects grade level achievement. So that's the threshold or grade level achievement to get into the applicant pool. And then what I was suggesting in terms of selecting within that qualified applicant pool is then using their 6th grade MAP test whether it's given in the fall or winter, and their GPA, as we have already discussed, in some fashion, equally weighted or other, as the ranking criteria in order to determine who gets invitations out of the applicant pool.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Lum, can you say just the last part again?
Sure. So I was saying, once you have the applicant pool, then that group will still have to take a MAP test in 6th grade, and they will have their 6th grade trimester or first 2 semester scores. So that combination in some way, shape, or form would be how you would rank the students within the applicant pool.
Thank you. Mr. Kreger, and then Dr. Wait, I'm sorry, Dr. I was like, wait, Dr. Freeman Wisdom was
No,
in there.
I lowered it because I thought
Oh, okay.
Ms. Lum had finished speaking. Yes, so my recommendation would be, because we keep having different versions of Mr. Contemplos's suggestions. So what my recommendation is to use an assessment, if it's the MAP assessment, so be it, to verify grade level work, and then apply the GPA, and then go into whatever kind of pool there's going to be after that. But that would be my recommendation. I wouldn't use the grade alone. I do feel that every student should have to take an assessment so that the grades that are submitted are actually verified.
So how would you use the GPA? So I understand that. So I get that, I believe I understand how you would use the assessment. What would your mechanism be for seat allocation? What would you use?
I'd probably use just a straight ranking. I mean, I know that may not be popular, but that would be my recommendation.
Mr. Kreger?
Mine is more of just a quick question. I appreciated Ms. Grassa's suggestion that the students could take the December MAP if they didn't get the qualifying score needed in September. I think my question would be, who pays for it, right? Is that something that the district offers, not just to BPS students who may be automatically doing that? Like, how does that piece of it work? Because I think that's a logistical difficulty that we'd want to be able to solve.
Who paid, Ms. Hogan?
So in terms of the way NWEA licensing works, once the student has taken one test, they sort of get that quote unquote license for the assessment is theirs to use for the year. So in that respect, there wouldn't be an additional cost. However, if there are Saturday administrations or anything else that might take test proctor time, space, there would be implementation costs to that.
And currently, well, previously with the IC, did the district absorb all of those costs for any student who was taking the IC?
That is my understanding.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Tung.
I'll try not to repeat myself, so I won't say everything that I've said before, but I just want to remind everyone that the MAP test has all sorts of validity concerns that they were given multiple opportunities to address. And then I also wanted to make another point. On Monday night, a speaker who used the Cantonese interpreter spoke about the need for the selective high schools to admit qualified applicants. And she used herself as an example by saying her lack of English proficiency meant that she was not qualified for a selective school. And she implied that she would not be able to gain entrance because of a test, and even if admitted, would not be able to do the work. And I think she should be admitted. Research shows that when language learners become proficient in English, they do as well or better than native English speakers on a range of indicators. This is yet another reason why we should not use only a test for eligibility, and why I can agree with Ms. Lum's suggestion to do a test or GPA for getting into the eligibility pool. We would be excluding English learners like the person who gave public comment, and frankly, students with disabilities. When students of different ethnicities and languages learn next to each other, everyone benefits.
Ms. Garrett.
Thank you. I think Dr. Tung's concern around ELS is really important. And while we're not talking about the other indicators right now, I do want to raise that as a concern when thinking about an essay as criteria. I've done research about other indicators as we've tried to answer this question around what other than an assessment can foster grade level readiness. And frankly, the inequities are so extensive for all indicators. This is why we've been sitting in this dilemma. Every subjective indicator also favors wealthy applicants. So I do want to think about that and maybe that could be solved in the way that the writing is being assessed. But I do want us to think about that when we're thinking about portfolios and writing as well, is that any unintentional exclusion of those who are still developing, who could absolutely still be at grade level. It's not the case that ELs aren't at grade level automatically, even if their language is developing. The same for special education students, as we educate special education students who are at the exam schools currently.
Well, I don't know that we determined that any submission had to be in any one particular language. So we have many options to create a process that is as accessible as possible and gives young people the opportunity. I keep reminding myself, we're talking about 5th and 6th graders, the opportunity to show us their best. Mr. Chernow.
Hello, everybody. Well, just adding on to Dr. Tung's point, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the test is also offered in English only. So that kind of throws that one out the window. I mean, that shows that we're really not being inclusive to our English learners off the bat if we include a test. I mean, there's really no way to get around it. I think we're also not being inclusive to our special needs students, as Ms. Garrett mentioned. But if we use a test that's only offered in English, we're automatically taking out a huge population of Boston Public School students, which is why I'm again urging that we don't use a test.
Can I mean, Mr. Chernow, I told you before I'm going to start doctor because we're going to be prophetic. You're good. Miss Grassa.
Yeah, I may be jumping ahead. I was thinking if we do other alternative ways to qualify for the pool, we should be offering it in multiple languages. Students should be able to choose their language, whether it's their first language or it's a second language they've acquired and they would like to write, read, or I also think a speaking option should be available if students do not want to write, but I won't go on too long until we dig into that.
Great. So, all right. So let's see, where are we? So I actually want to go back to this question on, and I think it may have been Mr. Kreger who brought this in to the conversation about kind of the use of the test. And again, I do want to reiterate to Mr. Contompasis's proposal that I actually, that is one that I could, I think, get there on, especially with, and who made the suggestion? Was it Miss Grassa about twice, or who? I forget. Yes, Miss Grassa. Miss Grassa's comment about, you know, the September and December administration if needed. But I also, so I can get there with that proposal. I also can get there with either using the it's using the assessment as the threshold to get into the pool, and using the GPA for the, because essentially the assessment would be serving as the validator that the grades are what they present themselves to be. And then using the GPA ranking for the order, to determine the order in which a student would have the opportunity for seat selection. I just want to put that, I hadn't commented fully after the full round, so I do want to make sure that folks know where my head is right now. Mr. Contampasas.
I just want to respond to Dr. Tung. First of all, no one is suggesting that students where English is not the principal language of the house are denied admission to the exam schools. I hope that's not what I hear you saying. Any student that has really an ESL rating of 3, 4, 5, in my mind, can do the work at any of the exam schools. But I think you have to draw the line, because if you are an ESL 1, I doubt whether you'll be able, at the time that you're listed as an ESL 1, to handle the work at the exam schools. There are plenty of students in the 3 exam schools who have IEPs. There are plenty of students in the exam schools where accommodations have been made for those students to get what is needed in order for them to be successful. But the impression is that, you know, that we have schools in the district that should be admitting students that quite honestly do not have, at that particular point, the ability to handle the work at the schools. There are multiple opportunities to get into those schools later, if need be. But there are students in all 3 of the exam schools who have designations as ESL learners and as students with disabilities.
Well, Dr. Tung, do you want to respond to that? Because I thought you were referring to a comment that's one of the, from one of our, one of the public comments. Or I thought you were, actually your comment is aligned with Mr. Contampasas's, is what I thought. But
Yeah, I don't need to respond. Thank you.
okay, all right, okay. Mr. Chernow.
Yeah, I would just like to respond to that, because I think the level of, as someone who attends BLA, I'll speak for BLA because I don't go to the other 2 exam schools, but as someone at Boston Latin Academy, my sister, not to put her business out there, but she is someone who has IEP, but her IEP is not on the level of her. Like, I've seen students with more disabilities who have had like a parent, like is that a power of a parent, someone who, you know, has to sit with them in the classroom, and they do not last at BLA. Like, by the time 9th grade came, the few that I knew that were there in 7th were gone, because that's because the school is not adequately, and that might be a different conversation, but I'm not sure I agree with that. At least BLA is equipped and supportive of students with special needs and I really don't know any ESL students in my school or English learners in my school. So I'm confused as to where that's coming from.
Coming from experience. That's where it's coming from. An ESL 1 would not be able to handle the work at the 3 exam schools. But there are students who do have ESL designations that can and do succeed.
So what I'd like to do is, I see Dr. Freeman Wisdom's hand raised. I'm going to go to Dr. Freeman Wisdom and then this is an important conversation to have about supports that are available in the schools for all students. And so perhaps after we get through kind of the core of our recommendation, we should continue this conversation so that we can think about what additional recommendations we need to make to ensure that all students are supported, all admitted students are supported in the schools. But Dr. Freeman Wisdom.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify on the English language learners. The O'Brien is comprised of approximately 48% of FLEPs. And each year we have students who are, we have some standalone ESL 3 classes. And in the upcoming school year, as you know, we'll have some standalone ESL 1 and 2 classes. We are supporting those students. And they, and I just want to just say that no student, I want my take on the exam to be clear. English language learners can do the work. But when you look, so I want to make that statement, and our students with disabilities can also do the work. We have both. We have, I know the other exam schools have them as well, resource rooms and strategy for success programs to support our students. Those supports are there, they are in place. The numbers are low. So if you're a student at the school, you may not notice that students are receiving that type of support. So that's one, that's really key to know, and that the students are at the school and we are able to support them, and they are welcome at the school as well. But when you look at what's required, if you are an ESL 1 student and you have the set school's graduation requirements, and a student at an ELD with an ELD level 1 requires up to 3 class periods per day in an ESL class. And so the things that a young person would think that they'd be doing when they get to the exam schools and having taken advantage of the opportunities that are there, they end up becoming limited. So we have to look at, and I can't just change the master schedule. It requires a BTU vote. So that if we had my school has a 6-period day. If we had the 7-period day, that student would be able to take part in some of the elective options or some of the pathway courses that we require. But when you're under the federal mandate in terms of making sure that students with disabilities and English language learners at certain level require a certain number of minutes in a specific setting, it bumps against the graduation requirements. And then we have to become creative in terms of how do we make sure that these young people graduate within that 4-year time frame. So when we're thinking about, just as we're developing this plan, let's continue to think about the supports that are needed once these young people are there, so that they can be experienced, they can be successful, and not have a bad experience of being 1 to 2 students in a classroom for 3 hours a day by themselves. So there are some things that we can, we just need to make sure that we're cognizant of what it looks like in play. So the support, and so again, as we're developing this plan, how are we going to support the students that come up?
Ms. Garrett?
Thanks.
so I only, because school leader, I want to give you the floor on this, but I also want us to get back to the question at hand for tonight.
I can do both. I just, I think Dr. Freeman Wisdom covered, I concur with all of those things and just wanted to share the profile at BLS that we do have 500 students who are former ELs. So, you know, we have over 40 languages spoken in homes, and that is absolutely an asset to the BLS community. So I did just want to say that. I also think that we have arrived at a place that is different from at least where I personally started with this conversation in thinking about an exam as a threshold. And I think Dr. Freeman Wisdom said it well with a validator around the concerns of grade subjectivity. And in that way, we don't have comparative data that has not been done at the exam schools before. And so there are potentially many more students with similar profiles who could access the school with a threshold as opposed to a ranked order using an exam score, which I know was one of Dr. Tung's real concerns from the beginning around the absolute scores and the ranking, which will very naturally advantage heritage English speakers, et cetera. So I did, bringing us back to the test, Ms. Sullivan, I do think that there is some more common ground that's being discussed, and wanted to just acknowledge that transition as potentially being a way for us to welcome more students with different learning profiles to the exam school communities.
So why don't we do this? So with that, building on that and using Mr. Contompasis's recommendation as the starting point, how do folks, I'm going to try to take this in steps. How do folks feel about using the MAP growth assessment? So NW, that's the correct name, right? NWEA MAP growth assessment. As a qualifier for the pool, which would mean that the district would need to work with NWEA to determine what that threshold is that would reflect student being at, did I hear this correctly, grade level
or above.
Or above. Which is how we used MCAS this year in a sense. How do we feel about that? I'm getting blank stares. Okay, Mr. Kreger.
I am comfortable with using the MAP growth as a qualifier for admission to the school.
Ms. Lum. You're on mute.
Sorry. Are we saying that test would be the sole qualifier and you would have potentially up to 3 opportunities to take it?
I didn't hear 3, I heard 2.
Oh, I thought we were talking about 5th grade or not. So we're not even looking at 5th grade as a criteria for 23-24 admission school year.
You did suggest 5th grade.
I'm looking at 5th grade in the traditional way where we have agreed
Same.
and English language arts would be combined with either the quarters or the trimester in grade 6 with the 4 subjects for grade 6. And that would be determined, that combination would determine the GPA.
Right, but as it relates to the assessment, I think Ms. Lum is asking So Ms. Lum, are you suggesting the spring, 5th grade spring map or September map, 6th grade, or was it December map?
Right.
for 6th
And
grade?
that just might be my misunderstanding of how the test has been used or monitored. I think what I was thinking of, in lieu of knowing that growth is relative, so growth in and of itself as a measure isn't quite accurate, would taking the MAP test in 5th grade and again in 6th grade and demonstrating consistent performance at grade level or better be an indicator of preparedness that just covered more bases for indicators of preparedness that I heard the school leaders being concerned about.
I need you to show up more than once. If that makes sense, Ms. Lum. You know, like in terms of.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying if we had 5th grade scores and 6th grade scores.
I don't know the benefit of both unless it's a student having multiple opportunities to reach the threshold, which I definitely see advantages to. But I think we have to remember there are some students who won't have 2 grade levels of tests, and there is generally need to be like a testing season for folks who are not already in BPS. So I just, from the school leader perspective, either year I think could do what you're describing, but I don't know if it provides us any more information, especially if it's a threshold and not a score average, to have multiple tests for the same student once they've reached the threshold.
I think, Ms. Lum, that the third choice would have been, like we had said, MCAS, which would have been spring of 5th grade, and then the fall map, and then maybe a winter map. I arbitrarily picked September and December. So I think maybe that's where you're seeing the 3, but I would be saying when we have MCAS, that's how we could do it, and say we could either use MCAS or a map.
Growth.
Because we will have to offer the math growth twice if we're giving everyone 2 choices, because the students who do not take MCAS would lose out on that option potentially.
I see. So let me just make sure, let me give this back to you. So what I'm hearing is MCAS or MAP growth to qualify you for the pool. And if you're a non-BPS student, you could sit for two MAP growth offerings in order to meet the threshold. Is that, I'm just trying to reflect back what I.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying in fairness, if we're saying we're worried about a kid having a bad day, and so kids who go to BPS, and actually charter schools would also qualify for this, we get to take the MCAS. And then if they didn't do well on the MCAS, take the MAP growth and do well enough to qualify for the pool. I would think we would want to offer the same option to other kids in the city of Austin to have one of 2 chances.
Multiple options.
Yeah.
Which again would, okay, Miss Aguirre and then Mr. Contapasis.
Yeah, I am open to having the MAP growth test, and I'm also open to use it like more than once. I just think that we have to be careful when we plan to have the test, because I mean, I wonder in September, asking a kid who just came back from vacation, we know that usually they go down. What is grade level in September, you know? I wonder about that. I would rather use it like in December when they actually have been in the grade, not just when they just arrive to the grade.
Is anybody, oops,
Yes, Mr. Contabasis.
I just wonder if we're talking about multiple assessments or multiple tries at the same assessment, how then do we ensure that non-BPS students have the same options? They don't take MCAS and they may not take the MAP test. And so how are we then suggesting that if our kids take it twice, how are we going to logistically ensure that the other students who live in the city are getting a fair shake at this?
Ms. Grassa, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, we'd have to have 2 Saturday administrations. A fall Saturday administration and a winter Saturday administration. For students who do not attend BPS schools. All BPS students, I would assume, would just take it in school because it is already an assessment that they will be taking.
Yeah, we're not deviating from the weekly test date.
No, I think students taking it in their home school during the day is the best option we can do for kids.
Absolutely. And so I want to come back, if I may. I worry about the fact that we're compounding this issue by suggesting or trying to find ways to deal with it. I don't know how we're going to get there. When I suggested a threshold value that is grade level equivalent and an alternative that suggested if you had a bad day, you could apply for a place in the application pool if you could demonstrate you had a 3.0 and above. And you might want to throw in something that would determine that, the student was eligible for the pool. Like we talked about writing an essay, or what Ms. Nagasawa suggested. But that would have to be something that would go hand in hand with the alternative to being in the pool, in my mind. It's a way of getting around this. Because what we do when we suggest a threshold is we take away any grading option, in my mind, for the test. And as Ms. Scarrett said over an hour ago, then what's the value of the test if you can get in with your GPA? And we're back to where we were on the interim plan. So that's the dilemma. And
I'm sorry, Mr. Contabasis, are you revising your recommendation?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's the same as it was initially, but I'm suggesting that if people are concerned about the test not being of any value because we're only looking at it as a threshold, and then we're concerned about students who have a bad day and may not make that threshold, but have a 3.5 or a 4, and they're denied access to the pool. So how do we develop some mechanism whereby that student who had a bad day either can sit for the test again? We do give the test twice. We give it in November in 1 week, and then 2 weeks later, we give it again. And we could possibly suggest that anybody who had a bad day on that test would automatically be able to take the test again 2 weeks later. But again, it would be a threshold value as opposed to an absolute score. That's fair for any student, regardless of what school they attend, in my mind.
Miss Garrett, and then Miss Lum.
Thank you. I think Mr. C just brought us back to the conversation about taking tests multiple times.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention that this might address Mr. Kreger's question about costs earlier, that the 5th grade MCAS were a qualifier, then all of those students would be exempt from a MAP administration for this, which could potentially allow for the 2 tests for students who need it. Just thinking about, you know, the added operations and expenses of adding a test administration, we should be removing a test administration if we were open to using spring MCAS. So I don't know if the contract works out that way, but I just wanted to mention it as a potential neutralizer in terms of the volume of testing that we would be doing related to the exam school process, especially with Ms. Aguirre's good point that a September score is going to be very similar, you would imagine, to a spring score the grade before, especially after summer learning loss. So I was very struck by that point.
I was going to say something similar. If we used 5th grade scores, it would not be, my assumption is, rightly or wrongly, that those scores would not be significantly different from a fall 6th grade score. So whether it's MAP or MCAS, if we are able to create an initial qualifying pool based on 5th grade test scores, then those who didn't get in the 5th grade have the option to get in the fall and or winter of 6th grade.
Okay.
So if a student,
No, go ahead.
I'm saying if a student takes the MCAS at 5th grade and does not qualify, that student could take the MAP test in November. And if that student then qualified, they'd be in the pool. My concern about the MCAS is, again, it's not given uniformly across the city.
So couldn't we use it similar to how we used it? So if it's an or, similar to like with the interim policy, we said MCAS or GPA, right? So, or grades, I hate saying, this thing about GPA with 5th graders is just, it doesn't work for me.
No.
So we said MCAS or the grade. And so could we, I mean, we can think through logistically what this would look like, but could we say MCAS or the MAP?
Well, what I said is that every student had to take the MAP test.
Yes.
The issue, again, is do we then suggest that for the student that may have had a difficult time on the test could get into the applicant pool either by taking the makeup, which is 2 weeks later, or having a GPA that would be verified grade level or above. It would get them into the pool.
How are you verifying, Mr. C? I'm sorry.
Say again?
What is your method of verification with this piece that you're naming?
Well, what we tried to do this year didn't work.
That's why I'm just trying to understand the proposal.
So what if we were to do, instead of looking at MAP, again, I'm mindful that MAP should be administered up to 3 times in the district. We don't know what other schools are doing, but we are a task force of the Boston Public Schools School Committee. So that's the information and data we have to work with. Could we look at, rather than fall of 6th grade for map growth, could we look at spring of 5th grade?
Wouldn't that be disadvantaging the student? I'm
And-
not following why.
Yeah,
but
well, I'm thinking about, and I don't remember who, I think it was maybe Miss Aguirre who mentioned, and it's also a concern for me as well, like having kids show up in September or October of the 6th grade, having to demonstrate that they're at 6th grade level, recognizing that summer loss is a real thing. It's well-researched and documented. So I'm thinking, if a child sits for this at the end of their 5th grade year, then they have been given every opportunity to demonstrate that they're at that grade level. They've had an entire year to get to grade level. So I'm thinking that would be their best foot forward. Ms. Grassa, then Mr. Kreger.
I mean, yes, we could do that. I think that was the first question. Like, could we? I think the answer is yes. I just would want to think about kids who move into the city of Boston come 6th grade.
Yep.
And just thinking about that piece and knowing that when they enter one of these high schools, that the data for which they entered will be about a year and a half old, which is what we did this year. And so is it a thing we could do? Of course, it's a thing we could do, but just to name it.
So could we do, point well taken, could, I'm back to 2, because so could we do 5th grade map, spring map, spring 5th grade map, or fall 6th grade map, whichever demonstrates that you're at the grade level.
Yes, it would just have to be a different grade level. So in
Right,
the
it
5th
would
grade
be,
spring
but-
map, it would have to be the 5th grade level. In the 6th grade, it would have to be the
Right.
6th grade level.
Either way. But it's 2 opportunities to demonstrate the grade level, but you only need 1. Mr. Kreger, you are pontificating.
No, I took my hand down because,
Oh, okay.
as usual, Ms. Grassa thought of something before I thought of it and said it better than I could. So I'm good. You know, I like I'm comfortable with any of the ideas that have been put on the table. I think to Ms. Garrett's earlier suggestion about the utility of having the spring 5th grade MCAS be one of the ways in. I suppose if we were to follow Mr. Contopassis's proposal, such that every student took the map in the fall of their 6th grade, right? For those who'd already passed the MCAS, you would thankfully reduce you know, the test performance anxiety, especially if you knew you'd already done fine. You may well double it for those who know that they didn't get to the score that you want. But I also appreciate the financial aspect for the district's administration that Ms. Garrett raised, right? That you could, you know, whatever you do, right? Like if there's one way or another to clear out some of the students who have to take the exam in the spring of 5th grade, that could help toward the ability to administer multiple times in 6th grade. I'm good with any of these options, so I'm going to stop talking. I appreciate the time.
Okay. So I'm mindful that of where we are in this conversation. And as best as possible, I want to make sure that, again, I reiterate, we're talking about 22.
23, Ms. Sullivan.
23, sorry, I'm trying to get the classes. We're talking about 23. And so would love to hear, what I do appreciate are is the sensitivity to the fact that we are in talking about an assessment, that we are trying to identify multiple opportunities for a student's grades to be validated in saying that they're at grade level, to indicate that they're at grade level. So I do appreciate that, but want to hear from some other folks on that. Mr. Chernow.
I'm just a little confused. So if I'm just gonna like try and respond to your question in a way that makes sense to what I think you're asking. Are you asking like, how are we going to validate students being at grade level another way besides grades?
Right. And what's on the table is to use the assessment essentially as that validator, to say that the grades are what they present themselves to be, which is that the student is at the B or better level.
So what happens if like they're at a B and they don't pass the test?
Yes, that goes to Ms. Aguirre's concern about kind of if you have, so if it's a B, or it could even be an A.
Right.
And they don't pass the test. And so this is not about passing a test. This is about having an assessment score that demonstrates they're at a certain threshold. So that's where the conversation is around, do we give students another opportunity to sit for the math growth? Or do we look at perhaps their MCAS score? Or Mr. Condompasis's earlier point was, and we didn't give a threshold, but I'm gonna bump it up higher. If a student has a 3.85 GPA, we just say you're in the pool.
I think what I would say is I'm open to as many, I guess I'm more open to more ways of being able to, I'm not opposed to seeing someone's grades at 3.0 or better and think that they're great and think that they're grade level. I don't personally feel like I need another way to show myself. Mm-hmm. If the task force believes that we need to see multiple ways of validation, then I would say, I'm not sure how this would work, but let there be multiple ways without making you have to check off 2 boxes, like check off a grade and a test. Like, and again, that gets back to what Ms. Garrett was saying about if we don't make a test mandatory, then we're saying a test is mandatory, which, as y'all know, I'm not opposed to. But I don't know how that could look to get in other perspectives about how they feel that the test should be mandatory. But I would just say, like, my opinion is I'm not opposed to one way of showing that a student's grade level being the way that we looked at their grade level.
How do you feel about, but would you be okay if we gave students multiple options for that validation?
I think that's the thing that I'm kind of like pulling at right now, is because I'll just say real quick, like if we give them the opportunity, I wouldn't want it to be how it used to be, where the IC test, like only if you know about it, you can take it, right? Because that's only going to give the students who know about the test the opportunity to now get 2 ways to get in. But at the same time, if students are already taking MCAS, if our BPS students taking MCAS, I think it seems like counterintuitive to make them take another test personally. But I don't know. It's like that pull and push, but y'all in there.
Okay, good. Miss Lum, then Miss Grassa.
I guess I'm a little confused when Ms. Grassa talked about the 5th grade spring assessment assessing at 5th grade level, and then the 6th grade fall assessment assessing at 6th grade level, when 6th grade hasn't been completed yet, but 5th grade has been completed.
Ms.
Okay, I can take that, Miss Lum. So you would get the assessment of like 6th grade 1 month. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you would get like a 6.1, which is like 6th grade first month, 6.2, 6th grade second month. So it would be like beginning of 6th grade equivalency, whereas the 5th grade one would be end of 5th grade equivalency. So it gets that narrow. Mr. Turno, I want to pick your brain on this. So one thought I have about having more than one, like having an assessment and grades matter for a few reasons. One, I went to I'm a BLA alum, just like you, okay? And I can think of any course I've ever taken in my career where I got an A and I was like hyper motivated by the teacher. I was engaged in what was happening in class. I can also tell you times I got a C, D, and F. And that grade wasn't necessarily saying that I'm not on grade level or not a smart person or I couldn't do the work. Most of it that I can think of in my own personal experience was due to like a lack of engagement around what was being taught to me. And honestly, maybe not feeling cared for by the adults or the students in the class, because there's oftentimes like student conflicts that are happening within spaces. And so in thinking about grades and an assessment, it gives an opportunity for kids who maybe haven't quite found their niche in the classroom, but really are at grade level and can handle the work and are looking for a different level of challenge, or the kids who maybe are not the best test takers, they get anxiety about it, but they have strong grades. And so finding a way to incorporate both to find that balance, because our students are not all a one size fits all, like the test is the easiest or the grades are the easiest for them. So just a thought back to you in your point.
Mr. Chernow, did you have any reaction?
No, I'm just in the
Okay, good. Dr. Tung.
How about 4 options with?
Mr. Condon-Passes, you're not on mute.
I know. I design. Why don't we have 6?
No. Dr. Tung, the floor is yours.
I'm being facetious. My apologies.
Dr.
This
Tung.
is supposed to be simple.
Yeah.
Remember,
Okay, Dr.
we
Tung
heard
has
it loudly and clearly.
the floor.
Absolutely.
This is supposed to be simple, but we're talking about in this district at this time, because these schools are so sought after, we're talking about really high stakes decisions of getting into the eligibility pool. That's why we spent so many hours talking about this. And so one of the options could be test, one of the options could be GPA, one of the options could be like Ms. Nagasawa suggested around short answers with a rubric for 7th grade teachers to basically, figure out, is it a good fit? Are they at grade level? And then the 4th option could be a capstone, which I know many 5th and 6th grade classrooms are doing. Some are not. But I know from my daughter going to a performance assessment school that you can tell a lot from a project, from a research study, from a presentation. You can tell a lot about what a kid knows and can do. And so, yes, we would have to figure out a mechanism to validate capstones from different schools, but it's being done already in the district. It's just not systemic, but this would be a good push to.
And
Yes, Mr. Contemplasis.
I'd like to try one more time. Just trying to put all of this together, and you guys will push back if you need to. I truly believe we have to keep this in a manner that everybody can understand it. Last night we heard, I think, comments around parents not even knowing what goes on in the exam schools or how to even apply. And so that was the basis for trying to keep this process as transparent as we can. I also would ask the members of the work group to remember when we first looked at 4th grade MCAS for the district, particularly at the meets and exceeds level. The performance was not very promising. And what's troubling to me is that it won't be much better unless there is wholesale change in the way the district tries to deal with some of the myriad of problems that they have. Put that aside. Here's where I would like to offer what I hope may be a point that we can all get to. Number one, all students sit for the MAP test in November. It will be a threshold type of test, B or better, meets or exceeds. Based on the criteria that we have already reached consensus on regarding what counts in 5th grade, what counts in 6th grade, we're going to generate a GPA. If a student has a bad day on the MAP test, which is given both during the week, on a Saturday, and then a subsequent 2 weeks later, if the student has a GPA 5th and 6th grade at 3.5 or better, with either an educator validation to the fact that this is a student that shows tremendous promise and is willing to put that in writing and get it to whatever the district establishes as a clearinghouse, that would be a way to get into the pool. Or instead of the educator validation, and I don't put this in the same category as having to validate that a student reaches a certain grade level. I put it in the form of an educator who feels very strongly about the fact that the student might have had a bad day and really has tremendous potential. The other way to reinforce that would be to borrow some of what Ms. Nagasawa suggested, and that we require that student who would have had to reach a 3.5 or better, and this would be open across the city, would also have to submit something that could be used to demonstrate, as Dr. Tung has talked about, some sort of portfolio opportunity. I'm not as keen on that as I am the validation. I think if we did that, I'm hopeful we might have consensus. I don't know.
Ms. Aguirre.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Tang that there is multiple ways for students to show what they can do and how valuable they are. My concern with a portfolio or a capstone project is that maybe students with more opportunities at home are going to be kind of privileged on doing that. So I will feel more comfortable if all of these things are done, and I don't know how that could be possible in a school, just to make sure that they don't have more access to resources. There's no more students with more access to parents with high degrees or more better internet or any other kind of resources. And that's going to be kind of helping students against students who are as smart and as hardworking, but don't have access to these other resources.
So could you, and I see Dr. Tung's hand raised, but just want to ask this question. Point well taken, Ms. Aguirre. Could we add on to, so if a student's sitting for MAP already, could we add on, going with Ms. along with Ms. Nagasawa's recommendation, perhaps give a student an opportunity to immediately following them taking the assessment to respond to a prompt in some way? And it would be almost like the opportunity for bonus points. No. Okay, Dr. Tung.
Mr. Contemposis, are you, is your proposal basically if your assessment doesn't show grade level and qualification into the pool, that it's kind of like an appeal process where you can get submit your GPA with educator validation or short answers right after the test?
Well, it wouldn't necessarily have to be right after the test. You'd have to, first of all, find out how well you did. But that's generally where I'm going with this. I'm looking for ways to address two issues. One, the student that has a bad day, the high stakes situation. And then looking at a student who has shown in 5th and 6th grade a high degree of achievement, GPA. We've established that to be 3.5. And with the validation of someone who knows that student well, teacher, school head, guidance counselor. Once the results come out and you have a student who is worked to get a 3.5 or better, I doubt whether there wouldn't be anybody in there, in that school, that would not go to bat for that student. And I don't think it would be a situation where pressure would be brought on the validator as it would be in some of the things we've discussed previously. But it would be available to any student who resides in a city who may have had a similar situation. I don't want to simply suggest that the only solution is to go back to a high-powered exam that you get an absolute score.
So let me offer up a suggestion. I'm looking at the time, 7:30. So where and correct me if I'm wrong on this. I believe there is consensus to use MAP as a threshold assessment for getting into the pool.
Yep.
Okay, I want to check in on that. The question that we're wrestling with is, again, we're looking at kind of what happens with the student who has the 3.5 and for some reason, it tanks the assessment. If I'm understanding correctly, that's the problem we're trying to solve for. But otherwise, is there consensus around using a 6? What did you all say? You said a 6th grade, giving students 2 times in the 6th grade an opportunity to
Get into the pool.
to get into the pool using MAP growth. Is there consensus on that point? I don't know. I'm looking, I'm trying to see. I'm reading facial expressions.
May I add a point?
Yes, Mr. Contempasis.
I know we're worried about the student who has a bad day.
Yes. I was going to take that as, I was trying to bifurcate.
No, I know, but I just wanted to make the point.
Okay.
That if that occurs during the test period, that's usually, and Ms. Garrett and Ms. Freedom Wisdom, help me out here. Isn't that student generally identified and comes back or can come back and retake that test 2 weeks later?
We don't currently have a multiple opportunity system. The current or the previous IC piece was for folks who missed the first administration, or for those who have religious exemptions for Saturday exam, there was a Sunday exam. But the difference Ms. Grassa also pointed out is that students didn't used to get their results immediately, so they wouldn't need to know. Now, you have a longer history, Mr. C, so there could have potentially have been health emergencies or medical emergencies mid-test that could involve some sort of appeal to retake. But I don't think that those are
okay.
We're discussing here.
Okay.
But I do want to strongly disagree that there would be no pressure on educators to be the validator. A student comes to them and says, you're attesting that I have potential, which frankly, every educator should write that letter, is the determinant for consideration, basically is a proposal that puts the decision-making completely in the hands of few teachers, because they are the same people who allocated the grades. So I don't understand how, when we came from a concern around grade subjectivity, to negate grade subjectivity, we're asking the same assigners of those grades to be the determinant to whether someone enters a pool. I think that underscores Ms. Grassa's earlier example of, that not every grade is a direct result of an accurate teacher assessment, despite I have a high level of respect for teacher assessment, but it is imperfect as we all are. And we also have circumstances where teachers have changed mid-year, so many things. I don't understand the educator validation not feeling pressured. So I just wanted to express concern.
Okay. Dr. Tung.
I was moving rooms, so I just wanted to answer your question about consensus on MAP assessment to enter the eligibility pool. And for me, I would want, if that's one of the ways, I just know that every test has disparate impact by race and income. And so I cannot go for that being the only way to get into the eligibility pool.
So what is your recommendation? So Mr. Condon-Passos has said for him, there has to be an assessment. And you are spot on with what the research indicates with respect to assessments. So what other qualifier would you use for the pool? Because we have to recommend something.
Well, I go back to Ms. Lum's original suggestion 2 hours ago, which was either MCAS or MAP or GPA. That's nobody else has to agree with me, but that you asked for a suggestion.
Yep.
That's a
No,
suggestion.
I'm processing. So you would have a qualifier that would be GPA only.
Because we know from this year that GPA, which we all agree means doing grade level work, gave us a good pool. It helped us meet our charge.
All right, it is decision-making time. We have had this conversation now it's 7:45, so almost 2 hours. We have to make a decision tonight, at least one, just one decision. Like we gotta, okay. Recognizing that if we don't make a recommendation, then we are, and I'll just say it from my perspective, we are rolling the wheels of time back. And if we want to move forward, we have to make a recommendation. And so where can we get on this assessment question?
Before we go there,
Yep.
I know we're trying to reach consensus. Is anybody worried about the fact that half of the students that would be sitting are not BPS students, but reside in the city? And they are not taking MCAS, and they're not taking the MAP test multiple times. So I think it would be very difficult to get that through the committee, I believe, because we're opening the committee up to lots of criticism. And so, you know, I keep hearing that, you know, the validation may not work. And Dr. Tung gave us an option. Are there any other options that will come across as such that every student that resides in the city has a chance to get in here without giving 2 tests to one group and 1 test to another?
Ms. Garrett.
I believe that our proposal does offer multiple opportunities for students of all school types to take multiple tests. The question just was around, should the first opportunity be a 5th grade MCAS? I would support it being a 5th grade MCAS because it's a test that students take anyway. And the vast majority of Boston students in and out of BPS do take it. We have a significant charter school population. And when we think about it, we're actually talking about a few hundred students not in that category. For instance, if we look at the numbers from the pool this year, we had a MCAS criteria already this year, so there is precedent for that. If it were exclusive or if it advantaged them by an absolute score, I think that would be different. We are talking about a threshold. So I do think that it doesn't preclude any students then starting the process later, but having a same number of opportunities. And I think that does address some piece of the bad day. It certainly doesn't address it if folks are not comfortable with an assessment for all. My advocacy is for an assessment for all. Mr. Chernow said it well, though we don't agree on the position. I completely agree with his assessment that if it is not a criteria for everyone for the pool, then it is effectively a criteria for no one. And we are back to discussing grades as the singular measure, unless we're also talking about other factors. So that's not a position that I am comfortable with.
So I just want to make sure that I'm capturing what you said. So in terms of substantively relative to this question on assessment, 5th grade MCAS or
multiple fall, winter opportunities of MAP. As soon as you make the threshold, you are no longer in a high stakes environment.
Yeah.
You have grade level work at that moment in time, and that would be sufficient. I would also suggest that a bad day may have some limits within that. In terms of maybe Ms. Gross's point about 6.1, 6.2 is very different from 4.2 or 1.2, and that maybe there's some opportunity to think about students with high grades who narrowly may have missed a threshold. That feels very different from being multiple grades off on multiple assessment opportunities. And so maybe there is some alternate process within some sort of range. But if the test has
yeah.
I'll stop talking.
No, that's actually a good point on that. And so I wonder if I just want to reflect back what I think I heard. So 5th grade MCAT. So this is what I'll say first. I think we should stop saying the bad day piece and just say you've got multiple opportunities to get in the pool, period. Whether it's a bad day, a great day, whatever, you missed the mark. That'll simplify it. So 5th grade MCAS or MAP growth in the 6th grade, you have 2 opportunities to take that MAP growth in the 6th grade, fall of 6th grade. Or what I'm hearing is we could create a grade threshold, like a combination, like a hybrid. You could have the grade, and since everyone will have sat for either MAP or MCAS, are you saying grade and some combination of a score on MAP growth or MCAS? Was that the last piece you were trying to articulate?
I was thinking about narrowing the range.
Yeah.
Mr. Conopasas suggested that just setting a grade criteria, or if they did not meet the threshold, and I was wondering some potential narrowing within that, the percent of seats, or whether it's within a grade level of the score. It's just a very different conversation for a student who tests on multiple occasions, numerous grade levels behind, even with a teacher endorsement from someone who really, it would be heartbreaking to hear someone testify about a 1 point off situation for a straight A student. They're just very different situations. And so I think it's too broad of a mark to say if you do not show at grade level, no matter what the score was, you have the same validation process.
Okay, Mr. Chernow.
Okay, so listening to what Miss Guerra has to say, I might get a lot of pushback on this, but that just made me think that, like, if you're willing to use the MCAS scores, if I'm I think I'm correct that BPS and charter public schools are required to take MCAS in the 5th grade, right? So that would kind of, for majority of the students, and then we can worry about like another alternative for the private parochial, but for majority of the students, that would take away the fact of like not having to choose or make a test mandatory, because we could already use that MCAS test. And then we could also use grades, because it would be like, you would have the same everyone we take, well, that pool would have the same opportunity to take both MCAS and or show themselves through the grades. And you would get to see both. We would see both, because both would be required to take, or MCAS is already required to take. And then for the private and parochial, we could offer MAP, or haven't thought that part through.
Well, so Mr. Chernow, the only thing I would say is that MCAS is an assessment. So if a student qualified for the pool with their MCAS score, that is an assessment score. Similar to it's similar to what the MAP growth would be on a threshold. All right. Mr. Contampasas.
This is more asking for clarification. So if we were to accept what Ms. Lum and Ms. Garrett have talked about, the student at the spring of their 5th grade year would take the 5th grade MCAS, and if they reach the meets or exceeds, they would automatically qualify for the pool the following year, correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
And they would not have to take anything else. But if they didn't do well on the MCAS and get to meets or exceeds, then they would sit for the MAP test either in what, September and then December? Is that what we're saying? Or have we determined when that would take place?
We haven't determined, but at one point you said November, and that they'd have a.
Well, November is the normal testing period.
Yeah.
But are we comfortable with any student that has passed the MCAS in 5th grade, they're in?
Yes.
All they have to worry about is their GPA.
Into the eligibility pool, not into the school, into the eligibility pool, not into the exam school from a test, from a threshold.
Into the eligibility pool, yes.
I want to caution us on.
Hold on 1 second, Katie. So I saw you, so I'm going to come back to that piece on MAP growth. But so Mr. Contampasas, to answer your question, that yes, that is what's being said.
So they would take, when would they take the MAP test?
Ms. Grassa.
Well, I would caution us picking a month. So I said I arbitrarily picked September, December. There are testing windows for MAP for them to find the grade level equivalency. I want to say it's like September through part of October. And then I want to say it's like maybe January to February. I don't know the dates off the top of my head. So I would say a fall and a winter is a possible. I think the second window opens in January. I would say Monica Hogan would know these dates probably much quicker than I would. I don't know that we can pick a date right now, but we don't need to know the date to decide on the mechanism.
No, I understand that, but
you know,
are we talking about 2 chances or 3 chances or
2.
4 chances? What are we talking about here?
Mr. Contampasas.
If I may, if we suggest, I heard the MAP test would be available twice.
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct.
And so would that be open to all students?
Yes.
And so the first of those tests could not be in September.
Likely should not be, although Ms. Grassa indicated kind of the timing may be dictated to us, but we could say fall.
We could pick a window. There will be a window of time.
let me then suggest, I'm almost there. I want you to
Okay.
know that. Okay? What is disturbing to me is the timing of this. Are we comfortable with saying 5th grade MCAS, you get there, you're done? Automatically, you're an applicant.
Yes.
Could we live with one more exam in the fall that would determine the eligibility, technically, of all the students who had not reached the point by MCAS and anybody else who wanted to apply, as opposed to 3 chances or whatever? I'm worried about the timing.
Okay.
You know, we lose students the longer we delay in getting the results out on the invitations. We lose them. Parents are forced into having to pay to hold a seat. Now, I don't want to get into that, but I can buy this in the spirit of reaching consensus. If we gave the MCAS in the spring of 5th grade, you make meets or exceeds, you're done. Then, if you didn't, everybody comes in and takes the MAP test in the fall, in November. And that's it.
Okay.
I think that addresses what everybody was concerned about.
That is a compromise for everyone. Is it one, and it looks like it's one we could live with. Mr. Kreger, I was giving folks a chance to just process, but go ahead, Mr. Kreger.
And my apologies for jumping right in like that. I can live with any of these options. If there was concern about giving students the chance to take 2 tests, right? Then there could be in the spring of 5th grade, a MAP growth test option offered for students who do not attend a public school, right? Or even for students who do, per your earlier suggestion, Ms. Sullivan.
Got it. So you're saying, so MCAS or MAP growth in the spring get you in if you meet or exceed. And then you have another option in the fall, no later than November of your 6th grade year, to try again any of the students if they didn't qualify as of the spring. Okay. Yes, Mr. Condompasis.
Just one logistical problem.
Oh,
I can live with what I just heard. The problem is that the test in the spring, as well as the one in the fall, for BPS students would be given during the week. The test in the spring and the fall would be given on a Saturday for everybody else.
Yep.
I guess I'm only concerned about how much this is all going to cost, but that's what I'm thinking of. Can we get, that would mean what? 2 different iterations.
Yep.
Right? I think they can do that.
I would concur. So I'm going to pause here at 8:03. Can we rest this conversation with, as it relates to assessment for school year 23? It would be used as a qualifier to get into the pool. And a student can do that either through their 5th grade MCAS or MAP score, or their 6th grade MAP score in the fall. Can we rest there on assessment? Unless, okay, I see hands raised. Are those hands raised to object? Okay, no. Okay. I'm lowering hands because I just want to, all right, hold on. Wait a minute. Oops, sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, Miss Dr. Tung.
Oh, are you doing a vote or what?
No, I'm not doing a vote. I'm trying to assess if there's any strong objection, meaning cannot live with that.
I wouldn't vote for that.
Okay. Well, Dr. Tung, I know you're still holding out for grades to be the only qualifier to get into the pool. I don't know that we're going to get there.
I understand.
Wait, are grades no qualifier anymore? Do we eliminate that part?
No. Grades are still in the mix, but we haven't had the conversation about grades.
So
Generally
that was
speaking,
just the test part.
correct. Grades are absolutely still in the mix, as we determined 2 meetings ago.
But they're not in the mix for the eligibility pool, right?
For a qualifier.
Okay, sorry. So you can't qualify by having any GPA.
We have it right. So we have not dealt with the outlier of, as a general rule, what we would be saying is, as I articulated, MCAS or MAP qualifies you to get into the pool. What we have not, generally speaking, what we have not dealt with that we could wrestle with is the I'm going to a 4.0, the 3.5 GPA student that, to Ms. Scarrett's point, keeps missing the mark by 5 points. I'm just arbitrarily throwing that number out there. We have not wrestled with that question. I would like to solve for the masses and then wrestle with any outlying situations that we might want to consider. Mr. Chernow.
Yeah, I'm also have to object, or not, whatever the word is.
Wait, what did you say?
I can't agree to that. Sorry. I don't know the word I'm supposed to say, but yeah.
Okay. All right. So, friends, we are. So my question then for Mr. Kreger.
Just curious, and maybe this is out of turn, but if we were to add what Mr. Contompasis was speaking about, what Ms. Sullivan was just speaking about, and tried to solve for the situation that Ms. Garrett was speaking about, where there is this option for a student with a really high GPA to be able to get in on some other path, be it a teacher validation or a short writing assignment or something along those lines, right? Would that be enough for this group to then reach consensus, right? And Ms. Garrett, I recognize you really don't like the teacher validation idea because of the pressure it puts on the teacher. But I also recognize your point about having a student who's on the cusp and has all of the academic potential that we're trying to recognize, right? And so, I'd want to know from you how to balance those things if this takes you from a yes to a no, right? But first, I would like to know whether this would be sufficient to take Ms. Tung and Mr. Chernow from a no to a yes.
Dr. Tung, Mr. Chernow?
I could do either MCAS or MAP or GPA of 3.0.
So go ahead, Mr. Chernow. And
Yeah, I was going to say that that's kind of where my head's at too. I think the 3.5 plus the teacher is just going to be too high, but yeah.
so I actually, let me, so we have an option, quite frankly, at this point. If we're cemented positionally, then we will have to take a vote at some point. I mean, that's just the only other option. Okay. And that certainly was not the desire to do that. It was the hope that we would be able to reach consensus, that folks recognizing that none of us are happy with all of this. I don't think there's any one of, I mean, tell me if someone is just doing backflips on this, but I don't think any of us are 100% happy with what's on the table. But a decision has to be made. And so ultimately, we may need to put this to a vote so that we can move on and, quite frankly, get to a recommendation. Because as I articulated, to not make a decision is to make a decision. And that decision is reverting back to what existed before the pandemic. And for me, that is not an option. Yes, Mr. Kondopassis.
I think there's been give and take here on all sides. When I suggested the GPA, I said that every student would have to take the test. That's not what I just heard. I may be mistaken. What I heard is I can live with this, and the GPA. That's not what I said. And so I couldn't support that piece of it. I think what is on the table, and if we have to vote, it's unfortunate because it may cause a rumbling down the road a piece that doesn't help anyone. What I heard was 5th grade MCAS meets or exceeds, 2 shots at or the MAP test in the spring, which if you reach the threshold, you're in the pool, or you take it again in the fall to try to get into the applicant pool. That's the position that I would like, if need be, if we can't get in consensus, that's the position that I would suggest we put on the table.
When is our next meeting?
Well, it was supposed to be the 24th, but it may well be that we have to also meet on the 29th because we have to submit this on the 30th. There is no give in that date. And so I would hope that we're thinking about how to reach compromise in this so that we act as a group. I think there's been a lot of give here. There's been a lot of discussion. And what we're seeing and hearing in my mind is I can't live with anything that suggests a test unless it's MCAS and/or GPA as a qualifier. So it's either or in my mind.
Right.
If we have to do this by voting, so be it. But I think we're creating a bigger problem than we should be.
All right. So this is what I want, and Dr. Tung, I see your hand raised. Give me one moment. That's right. We were going to meet on Monday, but Monday is Juneteenth observance here in the city of Boston. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. Freedom Day. I might suggest that we consider adding a meeting to the schedule next week. So we have the 20th, so we have Thursday for a task force meeting. I'm not talking about the listening sessions, but Thursday for a task force meeting. Mr. Condon-Pastas would like to suggest perhaps that we put Friday on there for a task force meeting as well. So that we can that would be after all the listening sessions, so that we can make our final decisions about the recommendation, and if necessary, take it to a vote. So that would be next Friday. So we have Thursday on the schedule because we removed Monday because of the holiday. We have Thursday on there, so we'll be adding Friday.
I would
So-
just like to say that is looking for 4 nights next week.
I know.
We want us all to be here. And I want to be actively engaged in the listening sessions to really hear and listen to what the city of Boston thinks of this. And I also want to be an active participant, but I think it's excessive to ask us to give up 4 evenings. Because already these meetings have gone significantly over. We're giving plus we read all the things that get emailed to us. We're giving 6 to 10 hours a week to this. I
Right.
think it's kind of excessive to ask for another meeting next week. That's just
So-
my personal opinion.
So does we cannot push this into the week of the 28th. So am I hearing from I know Katie, you're only one voice, Ms. Grasso, you're only one voice, but is there an echo on that we'll have one meeting next week and we're just getting it done one way or another?
I wonder, and I love folks' opinions on whether it might be possible for us to, I know the listening session is also school committee listening sessions, which is different format. Would it be possible for us to divide those and make sure that we read all written comments as part of our responsibility as task force members if we're adding a meeting? I share the concern for the reason you hear in the background around 4 nights of 6 hours of tablet. I don't want.
Understood. Mr. Kreger.
However this plays. Tonight we haven't gotten to touch any of the other things. If we're down to one more meeting, I would love to ask for Ms. Hogan's help in giving us a sense at that meeting of what this 10-point bump for high poverty schools could look like in impacting our simulations. So I'm just putting that request in, if at all possible now.
Got it. Thank you. Dr. Tung.
I don't want to hold up the process in the sense that the vote could happen tonight for this piece that we've been talking about. I understand the need for consensus. I agree that we need to come up with a recommendation for sure by next week. But if we can't get consensus, it's clear there's a majority. So I'm not going to change my mind between this week and next week.
I know.
Ms. Sullivan, I suggest we try to bring this to closure tonight.
Well, my concern about that is we did not notify, we have indicated for this past several weeks that we were going to work toward consensus. We did not, and that we were trying not to have to put things to a vote. And so we do have members who are not present this evening.
Yep.
And so I would want to give them an opportunity to be a part of that conversation as well. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the robust dialogue, debate, movement. I do think that we are in a better place than we started, even though we haven't reached our destination yet. With that, Ms. Parvex, we're going to public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. We have 6 speakers this evening, and each speaker will have 2 minutes per person. I will remind you when you have 20 seconds left. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom. Also, make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. I will move you up as a panelist, and we will ask you to turn on your camera for public comment. Our first speaker is Stephanie Shapiro-Bergson, followed by Sharon Hinton and Domingo Starosa. Please raise your hand. Stephanie, please unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad I'm going before the people that you're talking about. So they're tough acts to follow. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Shapiro-Bergson, and I have a 6th grader at the Elliott School and an 8th grader at BLS. Thank you for your commitment to increasing opportunity for all, not just for some. And thank you for the rigor you've applied to this process. As a public health professor teaching methodology and studying how rigorous methods can explain and ultimately bridge health disparities, I'd love to invite you to teach my courses based on the expertise you've demonstrated in exploring a shift toward equity in the exam school entrance policy. In other words, providing increased opportunity to all students from West Roxbury to my neighborhood of Lower Roxbury. I am thus confident that your work carrying out this rigorous process will ensure an exam school entrance policy that increases access to opportunity for all, addressing areas where the previous requisites failed. It's already June 17th and vital to our children that you continue this work, staying on track for a school committee vote by no later than end of June, early July. And thank you to each of you for your time, energy, and dedication, prioritizing what's in the best interest of all of our children.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Sharon Hinton. I don't see Sharon Hinton signed in. Domingo Starosa. I don't see Domingo Starosa either. And Lucia Colombaro. If anyone is here, please raise your hands. I don't see your names. We will go to Steve Yang and then Peter Piazza. Steve Yang, please raise your hand. Please unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Even I believe most of us are tired of this comments because looks like nobody listened to us, right? So I'm Steve Yang, a PhD in biochemistry. As a Boston resident and a parent, I have attended task force meeting many times. So today I have one question. How was the task force was formed? Those people who lead or had led a Boston public school or our parents in good discussion to the table, but there are also members of the task force who don't have any background in education. For example, Ms. Ransom Tom graduated from Harvard with a PhD in bionautical and medical science. She hasn't had rigorous training in education and professional experience as an educator. She has said GPA by a teacher is more accurate than exam score to evaluate a student. She has also said that exams support structural racism. Where does this come from in her research? Do we expect every student to get the same score on the exam? Not enough attention has been paid to the opinion from those professional educators. And there is full of non-professional talk from task force members. I'm very disappointed at the quality of this task force members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Peter Piazza. Please unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Mr. Piazza, please turn on your camera and unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your thoughtful attention to this important issue and for the opportunity to testify. My name is Peter Piazza. I'm a researcher at the Massachusetts Consortium for Innovative Education Assessment and a member of the National Coalition on School Diversity. I'll be speaking in favor of option E from the update release yesterday, or something that weighs a lottery heavily in determining who is invited once the eligibility pool has been created. Unlike a rank based on grades or test scores, a lottery is not as vulnerable to racial bias. And a lottery is a more simple solution than a system based on zip codes or census tract tiers. In the time that I have, however, I want to specifically address the concern that a lottery system would push parents out of the district. I believe this is an oversimplification left over from the wounds of an undeniably difficult earlier era. Though we still have a long way to go, attitudes about school diversity have begun to change, especially among white and/or affluent families. Unlike that earlier era, there is wider attention to the ways that school diversity is beneficial for all students and for multicultural democracy. Published just last week, in a paper simply called School Integration is Popular, researchers at the Century Foundation conducted a nationally representative survey. They found that more than 80% of respondents across racial subgroups said that racial and economically diverse schools are important to them. This perspective is evident, of course, in the white and/or affluent families who have testified here and at the school committee meetings in favor of changes to the admission system. These beliefs also find support in the research. At MCIEA, we conduct annual surveys of students in Boston, as well as our 7 other partner districts. In analyzing those surveys, we found that compared to their counterparts at less diverse schools, white students in diverse schools reported higher levels of engagement in school, civic participation, sense of belonging, and even physical safety. This lines up with earlier research linking school integration to greater comfort with people from different racial backgrounds. This is the kind of experience I want for my 2 white children. I know that you have heard from many who are opposed to a lottery, often in language laced with racial stereotype. This vision for public education, however, is out of step with the research and with broad public opinion. Simply put, it is not a vision that will lead us to the vibrant multicultural schools that our students deserve and that our democracy depends on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sullivan and Mr. Contemplasis, that concludes our speakers for tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Parvex. I'm going to go to Dr. Tung, and then I actually have a comment as well. Dr. Tung.
Thank you for giving me the chance to respond to Mr. Yang's comments today and also several other times during the past week, questioning both my Chineseness and my professional qualifications. I've led national education research teams focused on equity and justice at Brown and NYU, in addition to the Center for Collaborative Education in Boston. I've studied Boston schools for 21 years. I'm a parent of a BPS graduate of 5 schools, including an exam school. On Mr. Yang's accusation that I've forgotten certain Asian values, I can hold both many Asian values and point out how meritocracy is morally indefensible. I can understand the centuries-old culture of test preparation in Asia and know that there are other ways to instill a love of learning in my daughter. I can value hard work and know that for many in our country, hard work is no guarantee. Asians in Boston are not a monolith. Chinese in Boston are not a monolith. What some Asians in the city haven't grasped is that we're replaying a narrative authored by white supremacy, which pits historically marginalized groups against each other so that white people can stay on top. They're letting some Asians do the heavy lifting while they maintain almost all of the power and privilege. I refuse to be a part of that.
Thank you, Dr. Tung. I actually have nothing else to say. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Parvex?
Thank you very much. Ms. Aguirre? Mr. Chernow?
Yes.
Mr. Kreger?
Yes.
Dr. Freeman Wisdom?
Yes.
Ms. Grassa?
Yes.
Ms. Lam?
Yes.
Ms. Garrett?
Yes.
Dr. Tung?
Yes.
Ms. Sullivan?
Yes.
And Mr. Contampasis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to our interpreters for staying with us a lot longer tonight. Thank you very much for hanging in there with us. And thank you to the task force members. Good night.